Welcome back to the very last episode of this series. Great job if you've made it this far. Okay, so throughout this series, we've been building up our own basic but usable little framework here. But as I've noted a couple times, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using your own framework. It's better to use something that's battle-tested and more highly featured. So what I would recommend, and duh, by the way, I would recommend Laravel. And you're in luck because at Laracast, I have hundreds and hundreds of videos that will show you how to harness every piece of it. Let's quickly get you set up. So we're going to go to Installation, and you'll see that you have two choices. You can use what we would call a virtual machine. It's probably higher level than you are right now. Instead, let's use the Laravel installer. And we've already pulled in Composer, so you should be able to grab this and paste it into the terminal. Now, once that's done, you'll see this note. Make sure to place this directory into your path. And if you don't know how to do this, just perform a quick Google search, add to your path, Windows or Mac. So for example, on the Mac, you might open up within Sublime or Vim, you might open up your bashrc file, and you'll see some sections here where you could then say echo path equals this, and then we could stack on the rest of the existing path. So notice you separate each path by a colon. So we're just saying, yeah, I want my path to include this, but also anything else that's already existing. Anyways, if that went successfully, you should be able to run Laravel and get something like this. All right, let's create a new Laravel application. I'm going to switch to my desktop, and I'm going to say Laravel new, and this will be the name of your application. We were working with that concept of users, so why don't we reproduce that really quickly. Okay, so you can see it's pulling in a bunch of stuff through Composer. So Laravel leverages the community by pulling in everything from test frameworks to file system packages to Redis implementations to queues and everything in between. That's the beauty of Composer. Okay, so we're going to go into our users project and open this up. And now, really quick, I'm going to go back and do our PHP learning, and we're going to take a look at these. Okay, so on the right is what we've been working on, and on the left is Laravel. So there's more files here, but a lot of these are familiar to you at this point. Let's take a look at app. We have controllers, models, and views. All right, app. Console, okay, well that would be a different entry point into your app. HTTP, oh, there's our controllers directory. And if we go into this routes folder, oh, take a look at web. Oh, this is somewhat similar to what we had before. Let's go into routes. Router get, and if we take a look at this, yeah, it's basically the same thing. Route get. So that's familiar to us. And if we take a look at the app user class, this is sort of like a model. If we needed to fetch all users or create a new user or perform some action on the user, like change their status or their membership level, you might work with the user class. Now, admittedly, there's a number of new things for you to learn here, but I have a full LaravelFromScratch.com series that will take you through the nuts and bolts. So let's finish up by reproducing that little form where you can view all users and add a new one. And I'm going to go pretty fast. So when you do want to hit the brakes and learn each step, that's when you switch to the LaravelFromScratch.com series. Okay, the first step is I'm going to go to my environment file and specify my database. I'm going to use SQLite here. It's kind of a simpler file-based database, and I can get rid of those. Now, if I go into my config database file, remember you created your own config file for our project? Well, in this case, exact same thing, they're just separated into categories. So this would be our database configuration. If we scroll down, for SQLite, it's going to look for a file within the database folder, and then it's going to be called database.sqlite. So it's looking within here. Let's create that. database.sqlite. Next, you'll see that we have this concept of migrations, and this is brand new. So when you create tables, well, you could do it manually like we did, or you can use what we call migrations. So think of this as a PHP way to define, in this case, the makeup of a user's table. Notice a user consists of a name, an email, and a password. I'm going to go ahead and migrate the database. So when I run PHP Artisan Migrate, it will read these and build up the tables. Pretty neat. And even better, if you want to undo that, you could say, oh no, roll back what I just did, and it will undo the creation of those tables. That's the way it works. You have a method for up. So what should we do when we perform the migration? And what should we do if we roll it back? In this case, we drop the users table. So let's run it again. And next, I'm going to define a couple of routes. We can do that within the routes web folder. Now you'll notice there's 3 here. At your stage, web is really all you care about. We'll say when the user requests users, and the / at the beginning is optional. Some people like to see that and some don't. Now we could reference a closure here. And this is like for quick stuff. If you just want to quickly load a view, like users.index, this is kind of a nice way to go about it. For larger projects, I think you'll find that most people will delegate. Maybe a users controller at index. And notice how similar it is. Now, Laravel controllers are within the app directory, but also one layer deep within HTTP. Now, how do we create that file? Well, you could manually do it, but Laravel includes a lot of generators to make this stuff easier. If we run PHP Artisan, and by the way, PHP Artisan is Laravel's command line utility to help with performing any number of tasks. I think you're really going to like it once you dig in. But anyways, you'll see that we have a bunch of make commands. Think of these as nice file generators. So I want to make a controller. I could say PHP Artisan help, and then the name of the command, make controller, and it will tell me how to use it. In this case, I need to give it a name. Make a controller called users controller. There we go. And now we can see it here. So we specified an index method. Let's create that. And let's load a view in the exact same way. View, and we'll call it users/index, or you can also use a dot syntax, exact same thing. All right, now your views directory, you'll notice it's not in the app directory. In Laravel, it's actually within your resources directory. Okay, so why don't we create resources, views, users, index.blade.php. Now there is such thing as like a layout file, like we talked about earlier in the series, or for now, we'll just hard code a big block of HTML. And we'll say all users. Okay, let's run PHP Artisan serve to build up a server, and we can view it here. Okay, so here's the landing page for Laravel. We're going to go to users, and we hit that page. So now we need to filter through and fetch all of the users. Let's do that now. We already have a user class, right? And it's namespaced. And also the controller is namespaced, and you already know everything about that. So if I want to use my user class, we know now that I need to use app user. And now these 2 classes we're not using, so I can get rid of them. Now, what we did was a very simple database class, but this will be far more powerful. So if I were to say user and give me all of them, I can do something like this. And behind the scenes, that's essentially going to do a select star from users. Or I could say user where age is greater than or equal to 20 or 21, then give me only those records. So there's a lot of flexibility here. It's really cool. Fetch all users, and then just like before, we're going to pass them to the view. Or what you can do is return directly. Now, this is a bit of a higher level thing, but if we refresh, we have no users. But if we did, when you return from the controller, it will be converted to what we call JSON. And when you learn about APIs and things of that nature, this will be hugely beneficial to you. So let's create a couple users. I'm going to say PHP Artisan, and I'm going to use the tinker command. This is a nice way to interact with PHP and the Laravel framework. For example, if I said app user, I could just run that exact command here. And we can see it returned a collection of no items. Let's create a new user. But what does a user consist of? Well, let's go back to the migration. It consists of a name and an email and a password. Okay, the user's name will be me or John. The user's email will be john@example.com. And the user's password will be password, but you don't want to hard code passwords. So I'm going to use this helpful function called bcrypt, and that will create a hash for better security, like so. Okay, now I can save the user. Great. So if I hit up a few times to go back, if we fetch all users again, now we have a collection of 1 item. That means back in Chrome, if we were to give that a refresh, we can see the JSON representation of all of our users. So let's do this. We're going to load the user's index view and pass that through. And then I'm going to use the templating engine Laravel provides, which is called Blade. It gives you a nice syntax here. All you have to do is add .blade.php as the extension, and then you can do things like this, rather than PHP for each users as user. You can still do this if you want, but yeah, it's kind of gross to write. Instead, I could just say, for each users as user, and for each, then let's echo out, once again, before you might do this, user name, right? But now you could just say user name, and that will do the same thing. And in fact, behind the scenes, it's going to be converted to that. So come back, give it a refresh, and we have John. Let's next add the form to create a user. So we'll say, create an input with a type of text. The name will be the name, and a placeholder will be name. And let's separate this. Add a user. There we go. So they give a name. This is going to be a fairly sloppy form with no CSS, but that's okay. So we're going to have the name, and then we're going to have an email address, right? And we can use an input type of email there. And then we'll need one more, right? So we'll say input type is password. The name is password. And then placeholder is password. Okay, so refresh. We have our inputs, as bad as they look. And then finally, we will add a submit button. Okay, so when the user submits this form, where should it go? Well, like we did earlier in the series, it's going to submit a post request to /users. And if we try that out, add user, yep, it's trying to post there, but we haven't defined a route for that, so it's failing. And by the way, generally, you want to do things like this, where you force the user to fill these out at the browser level, and then even at the PHP level, you can use Laravel's validation functionality. Anyways, let's go and define a new route. Into the routes file, web, and we'll say now, when the user posts to users, we're going to hit the store method, just like we did before. All right, users controller, add a new method called store. Now I can say either user create, or like we did in the terminal, we can do it one by one. So I could say user's name will be, and we can do things like this. Give me the name from the request. So basically that translates to look in the form that was submitted and look for a key called name, and then give me the value associated with it. Next, the user's email will be the request email, and the user's password will be a bcrypt of request password. And then we'll save it. Now, let's just go back to the previous page so I can use this helpful back function. And whoops, looks like I did posts. Sorry about that. Post, of course. All right, and we'll say Jane at example.com, Jane. But now we come to something that we didn't have in our own little project, a token mismatch exception. So as you know, Laravel is going to do a lot of security type work that you may not even know about. And that's the nice thing about using a framework. You may not know about certain vulnerabilities that could exist in your project, but the framework and all of the people who have ever used it are aware of those. And this is one such thing. So we probably shouldn't get into it too much. We do cover CSRF at Laracast. You can search for that, CSRF, and learn all of the details. But mostly, it's just meant to ensure that the form was actually submitted from our website, rather than some hacker's website where the form posts not to their own server, but to our server in order to access certain things or perform certain tasks. Once again, it's just a security precaution. So here's what we do. For any form in Laravel, let's go back to resources, views, users. For any form that is not a get, you're going to add this little field here, CSRF field. So if we were to come back and give this a refresh and view the source, that's going to expand to this. And basically, this unique value will be compared on our server to see if they match up. And if some hacker's website, well, they're not going to have access to this key. So when those two get compared, if they don't match up, an exception will be thrown and you can't proceed. All right. So anyways, we're going to do Jane again. We add the user, it saves it to the database, and we redirect back. So I know it's a very, very simple example, but we reproduced what we did earlier in this series, and actually it's that much easier. I know there may be a few new concepts here, but you're going to get this so quickly. In general, you define a route. What am I responding to here? Well, these endpoints. What controller do I want to load? This controller. So you go to your controller. Or, in something like Sublime, most folks will do a Command P, like this. And then that way, you can hide the sidebar entirely, and that's how I work. If I go to my routes file, done. If I need to go to a controller, done. That's how I work in real life. Anyways, you define your methods, you fetch some data, and you load a view. In this particular case, we create a new user. And by the way, there's also ways where you could say user create request all. And if you have the proper production in place, you can turn all of this into one line. But just showing you the long form for now. And then once again, you redirect somewhere. In this case, we redirect back, or you could redirect to the home page, anything you want. So you've just inherited an enormous amount of power. You're going to be able to do basically anything you want with this. So there's a lot to learn, of course. Your next step is laravelfromscratch.com. Now, I will warn you, at the time of this recording, this series is using version 5.2 of the framework, while we've been using 5.3. It's 95% the same. You're just going to see a few differences. Like the routes file will be at the top level here rather than within the app directory. But it shouldn't be too much of a problem either way for you. Next, some series I'd like you to go through. If we go to the PHP skill, you just finished up the PHP practitioner, I would like you to go over to Object-Oriented Bootcamp. This is where you'll learn more about classes and the fundamentals of object-oriented programming. Next, learn some of the new stuff in PHP 7, which is what you should be using. And then while you're doing that, keep switching back and forth. So learn some Laravel. These series will be a little more advanced, but if you're curious about some of the new things that have been released over the years, you might have a browse through these. So you have your work cut out for you. We've only scratched the surface, but you're well on your way. Great work.